Hello and welcome to an ESG video discussion exploring the impacts and implications of big data and storage. I'm your host, Scott Sinclair, a storage analyst here at ESG, and I'm joined by my fellow storage analysts, Terri, McClure, and Mark Peters, as well as our big data analyst, Nick Rouda. Today's topic is exploring the concept of the data lake or data hub and its impact on storage decisions. Terri, can you help us define what a data lake is, and do these solutions make sense?
So, good question. What's a data lake? The term's certainly been bandied around quite a bit by vendors out there. It's really a central clearinghouse, a central place to store all of the information that's generated across the enterprise so they can leverage it to support business processes. So these sources may be many and varied across the enterprise, but the idea is that you gather all the data into one place so that you can mine it and leverage it to speed time to market for new solutions or to speed time to decision making for campaigns or whatever. So there's one place to keep all your data. This one place is accessible by many, many different analytics types engines or business units or business processes. And the concept does make sense because one of the big challenges that we have with enterprise organizations is that everywhere is that there's buckets of data all across the enterprise and nobody has any idea what they have. And this data is disjointed and it's not pulled together and it can't be related to other sources of data within the enterprise and you can't run analytics against corollary things because different business units might have different pieces of information. So the idea of pulling it all together and leveraging it to help speed business processes and having one central infrastructure to store all your data makes a lot of sense because it lets you cut down on the number of stovepipes you have across the enterprise and you get all of the associated benefits of maintaining fewer bits of infrastructure, increasing your utilization, cutting down your footprints and things that are associated with that type of a consolidation of infrastructure. So there's a lot of benefits, but there's also quite a few things you have to consider before you take on that type of an initiative.
Thank you, Terri. I think what we want to do is we want to go to Mark, and Mark has some perspective on those trade-offs of the data lake.
Well, generally, if you look at an old architectural model where every application had its own server, its own storage, and someone to look after it, there was some value in that in terms of making sure that everything was optimized. Once you put everything into this one big lake, hub, whatever you want to call it, I think there is a tendency to be concerned that you may end up with some level of compromise. That said, I think we've already talked both today from what Terri said and also in terms of other episodes in this series of videos, we've talked about the upside in terms of advantage from what you can do by having all that data together and applying intelligence and analytics to it. From a storage perspective, I think the one thing that overcomes or has the potential to overcome any mediocrity or compromise being a bad thing is what you're now seeing happening in the industry, which is an increasing renewed focus on virtualization, storage virtualization I'm talking about, and a new focus on such things as software-defined storage, and within that, QoS, quality of service, as an area of great focus. Because if you can get those things right, the virtualization, the software definition, the quality of service, then you can ensure that even within a data lake construct, you can still serve individual applications at the optimum level that they require.
Thanks, Mark. So, Nick, are we seeing IT users actually implementing data lakes? Are folks even asking about it?
Yeah, data lakes are starting to grow in customers' consciousness, but they're really being vendor-driven. People like the idea of having all their information in one location, but part of the challenge here is, again, if cost in managing the scale of data is an issue, having another location where you're copying all that data doesn't necessarily address that problem. It may make it easier to access, it may give you one source of truth for the enterprise, but it may bring, again, some of its own challenges. So while you have leading Hadoop vendors like Cloudera, Hortonworks, MapR, Pivotal, each presenting their own concept, and it definitely makes sense from a data management, data infrastructure point of view, it can bring other challenges, as we've already noticed. So I think the jury is still a little bit out on the concept, but there is initial promise and interest in it growing.
Thanks, Nick. So, Terri, who are the vendors who are actually active in this space, and what do they need to do to be successful? Are there specific software partners that they should be working with?
As Nick just said, this is a vendor-driven initiative from the Hadoop vendor side of the world. It's also a vendor-driven initiative from the storage vendor side of the world. And probably the loudest one out there is EMC. I saw, and they've got a big marketing budget, right? So they're out there really pushing this data lake concept. Of course, the storage vendors, it's in their best interest to push this message because what happens when you put all your storage into one place and it's their storage? They make more money, right? It's in their best interest. So end users need to remember that when they're listening to the marketing pitches. But the other people pushing it, a lot of the object storage vendors are pushing it. You're seeing CleverSafe and Scality and Amplidata and vendors like that pushing this one central place to store all of your data and then leverage it to support business processes across the enterprise. And they're doing it by supporting multiple interfaces into the object store or the storage environment to make it easy to create a data lake, right? I can ingest via NFS and extract via HDFS or access via HDFS to do my analytics, and maybe access it via SIFs for a business line that needs to look up some bit of data. Let's go back to something Mark said. Object stores kind of make sense when you start looking at applying policies like quality of service and where data may need to reside and things like that to the storage solution. So I think you'll continue to see the object storage vendors continuing to make a play into this space because of the scale you need to operate at and the manageability that you need to attain. And for the vendors to be successful, Nick already named them, the big four vendors that they need to work with. Certainly, Cloudera and Hortonworks are pretty well known, but Pivotal and MapI are very active in this space. So the storage vendors that will be successful are the ones that are going to be out there actively partnering and tightly integrating with those big four vendors at the very least.
Okay, thanks, Terri. So going back to Mark, I think one of the basic assumptions that we've had throughout this discussion is that big data is here to stay, that it's going to be a disruptive movement, and that it's going to impact storage technology. Is it really going to be here to stay for the long term, or could it possibly be just a passing fad?
I think the answer to that is you've got to disassociate the term from the concept. I think the term will be a fad, to be perfectly honest. But the concept, what it actually means, is here for the long term. And I love historical perspectives, as I think you know. And so I think if we look back, think of the way we went from batch to online. That seems like an archaic, and it is. It's an old way of thinking about things. I know there are still batch things done, but we all think online all the time. Think of the way we went from fixed computing to mobile computing. It's another huge change that was talked about, but we now just accept. And I think in the same way, we're going to move from specific applications to what we currently call big data. But big data ultimately is really just the ability to manipulate more data better and to integrate more data from different sources if that's what you require in terms of the output. So I think all of these things have happened because of capabilities. If you think about the amount of processing that is required for all of these things and that we now have. If you think about the amount of networking that is required for all these things, but we now have. And so I think right now we're excited that processing, networking, and storage to a large degree too, is able to support what we currently call big data. Ultimately, I don't think we'll call it big data. I think it will still be here because it's the logical extension of the way that we manage IT more broadly and get away from just servicing specific applications and specific needs.
Thanks, Mark. That's a great perspective. And this has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to check out other videos in this series.